So my daughter's been working at Conner Prairie. She's not one of the interpreters. She works in the ag division, so she takes care of the sheeps and the goats, particularly the goats, who she's fallen in love with, and the chickens and animals there. But a few weeks ago, my daughter said that she hadn't been to Conner Prairie as just a visitor for a very long time, and so she asked if maybe we could go and just go as a visitors, which we did, and it was a lot of fun. She knew the interpreters, so when there wasn't anybody around, they'd come out of character and we'd talk, and then someone would show up and they'd have to go back into character. It was really a lot of fun. But they've put in this really nice walkway at Conner Prairie that uh, follows the river. And there's a couple of rest areas there where they've built these little platforms that you can look out over the river. So we went and we walked and stopped at one of the overlooks, and sat and looked out over the river. And it was just so incredibly peaceful. It was very nice. It felt so good to be sitting there. And I heard the birds chirping and how wonderful that sound was. But a thought kind of crossed my mind that the birds were not chirping or singing to make me happy. The birds were singing in order to defend their territory, to defend their nests by singing and emitting calls to signal their presence and by chasing other birds away. Birds sing to attract a mate and defend their territory. A singing bird is actually saying, "This place is mine and I'm willing to defend it, especially from others of my species." He may patrol his chosen space and sing often, essentially communicating, "Look out, I'm here, stay away. This is my territory and you better get out of here or else." Oh, the bird, and most of the birds that sing and call are male birds. It could be the bird is saying, "Hey, babe, want to mate?" So I began to think about what was going on all around me as I sat in the midday sun. Animals eating other animals, insects eating other insects, even insects and larger animals eating plants. And plants. Now, plants don't seem to feel pain as we would think of pain, as humans understand it. However, researchers at the University of Missouri found that plants can sense the vibrations of caterpillars feeding on their leaves, and they elicit chemical defenses in response. Another group of researchers from Tel Aviv University found that certain plants emit ultrasonic sounds when stressed. Another study in 2018 found that when a leaf is being eaten, its cells signal danger to other parts of the plant, alerting them to brace themselves and begin repairing the damage. Yet, with all of this going on, life, destruction, killing, life feeding on life, there I sat, enjoying the beautiful day, especially the company of my daughter. The mythologist and educator Joseph Campbell wrote, "The first step to the knowledge of the wonder and mystery of life is the recognition of the monstrous nature of the earthly human realm as well as its glory. The realization that this is just how it is and that it cannot and will not be changed." Joseph Campbell, further in his book, The Masks of God, Occidental Mythology, wrote, "The virtue of heroism must be, therefore, not in the will to reform, but in the courage to affirm the nature of the universe." So I was thinking that in all of the great religions, the great philosophies, and the great psychologies of the world, we see this as their underlying aim: to face up to the realities of life, yet not be overwhelmed by them. And each of these teachings expresses approaches or practices to how to do that, to how to especially live life, to find meaning and joy in life is to take it as it is, but to look beyond the form and find a contentment that is found within or in the midst of these very realities. These great teachings attempt to widen the understanding of life, to carry on the existence of humankind, to be forged in the crucible of life, to gain knowledge of the reality of the outer and the inner worlds we inhabit. I'd like to share with you some of my current influences, what I have been reflecting upon when I consider the greater questions about life. First, in the Greek language portion of the collection of books that we call the Bible, there's an interesting passage where Jesus and his disciples are staying with friends at their home. And one of them, named Mary, brought an expensive perfume made of nard and applied it to Jesus. Now, nard is made from a plant that grows in the Himalayas and is used as ointment or perfume. The cost of the ointment that Mary applied to Jesus in our own time, it was about a year's worth of wages. At minimum wage, that would mean that in US dollars today, $15,000 worth of perfume was applied to Jesus. The disciples were not only shocked by the ointment that she was using, but of the amount that she was using. This devotion was seen as waste to the disciples. They thought that the value of the perfume could have been used to help the poor. But one of his disciples who was objected, saying, "Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was a year's worth of wages." And Jesus' reply is kind of interesting. He said, "Let her alone, so that she may keep it for my day of burial. For you always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me." In the midst of the realities of that world that Jesus and the others were inhabiting, Jesus was, or represented as Christ, the presence of God in their midst, however you define God. So even in the midst of the poverty, and of course, Jesus and his disciples, according to those writings, worked against poverty and spoke out against oppressors. Yet at the same time, Jesus was willing to be perfumed by this expensive nard, willing to recognize his representation as a presence of the divine and the holy in the midst of that society. I've been reading a lot about the Stoic philosophers lately, and there's a famous Stoic maxim that says, live according to nature, both in the sense of the laws of the universe and of humanity's own essential nature, our ability to reason. Information from Stanford University's Encyclopedia of Philosophy says about Stoicism, once we come to know what we and the world around us are really like, and especially the nature of value, we will be utterly transformed. And it makes me think about how one of my favorite rides at Disney, which is at Disney World, which is getting an overhaul, is Splash Mountain. If you've ever been on that, I mean, there's singing frogs and singing raccoons and all this stuff, and I love that. It's it's really a cool ride. Now they're changing it, by the way, to reflect the movie The Princess and the Frog, which will be a representation of more diversity in Disney World. But I just love that singing animals. But the reality of nature is even more transformative. I've been reading Viktor Frankl, and even among the horrors of a concentration camp, Frankl found the ability to find an inner peace. And it was not through ignoring the camp's horrors, but by finding that, according to Frankl, quote, we can discover the meaning of life in three different ways: by creating a work or doing a deed, by experiencing something or encountering someone, and by the attitude we take toward unavoidable suffering. And that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. In Buddhism, there's a thought that we should participate joyfully in the sufferings of the world. To confront and to overcome suffering leads to enlightenment. But it can't be by ignoring suffering. It must mean finding a calm and an inner peace that allows us to joyfully participate in what the realities of the world present to us. When I was studying for my undergraduate degree in religious studies, we had to read a portion of the Mahabharata, which is a Hindu epic. And it's a story of that highlights one's responsibilities and duties in life. It's an ancient epic where the main stories revolve around, or the main story revolves around two branches of a family, the Pandavas and the Kauravas. And this battle occurs between those two families, or between those two factions or sections of a family. And there's incredible destruction. And one of the main characters, Arjuna, the god Krishna, is riding with him in a chariot. And Arjuna is wondering, is this really the way that we should live our lives? And the god Krishna says, yes, this is your duty in this life. And after this destructive war, where so many died, only a few are left, they all rise to heaven, and within heaven, they are reignited, reimagined, and realigned with one another in this wonderful feast. And the Mahabharata says that they all get back together, former enemies, free of angst and rivalry against each other. So they dealt with the realities of life on the earth, but there was something more, something that rose above or beyond the realities of life. Okay, so that may all be very interesting, but I believe that the most important question, the most important theological question, once again, is so what? So what? So what if all these people, all these philosophies, all these religions or psychologies tell us that message, that there is the reality of life, but somehow we have to find a place of calm, not through ignoring the realities, but through finding that sense of inner calm and inner peace. Well, what I think is that these stories, these messages inherent throughout all these religions, philosophies, and psychologies, offers to me, and if I may be so bold, offers to our church a challenge to live in the dichotomy of engagement and disengagement. We engage with the realities of the world, with the sufferings of the world, but we're also able to be disengaged, not caught up, not overwhelmed by the issues and the problems of the world, to participate joyfully in solving or working to make better those realities of life. As Unitarian Universalists, we have chosen to exist as individuals and as a congregation with a living tradition, a wisdom and spirituality drawn from many sources, as diverse as science, poetry, scripture, and personal experience. These are the sources of our congregation. When we think about our congregation, our church, there are so many things that we have to deal with, the realities of an organization of people trying to get together and accomplish something. We have to figure out technologies that can help us as we form community and how we communicate with one another. We have to think about budgets and financing. We have to think about, pledges. We have to think about maintaining a building. We have all these things that are the realities of life. But when we look at the sources, what we're supposed to draw on, I refer back to the Unitarian Universalists' identification of the sources of our faith. And let me just cover these briefly with you again. There's 6 of them, remember? The sources that we, as a congregation of Unitarian Universalists, affirm and promote: one, direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which move us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life. We draw from the words and the deeds of prophetic people, which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. We draw from the wisdom of the world's religions, which inspire us in our ethical and spiritual life. We draw from Jewish and Christian teachings, which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves. We draw from humanist teachings, which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science, and warn us against idolatries of the mind and spirit. We draw from the spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions, which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. Those are the 6 sources by which we draw our life as individuals and as a group. And there's not one organizational structure that's identified as a source. There's no business model. There's no fundraising suggestions or plan. Yet those are the realities. But can we engage in the realities of life, yet know that our true life lies in the midst of all that, in a growing sense of peace, connection, and contentment based upon our spiritual life, whatever or however you define spiritual. And that's a whole nother sermon. It's a lot of fun to think about that, the varieties of what we call spiritual, and how they're all so impactful and important for each of us. We can't get caught up in the forms. We deal with them, but we have to dig deeper and draw from a deeper source. Unitarian Universalist Reverend Kathleen Rowland said, "Throughout history, we," that's the Unitarian Universalists, "have moved to the rhythm of mystery and wonder, prophecy, wisdom, teachings from ancient and modern sources, and nature herself." So as Heartland Unitarian Universalist Church looks to our future, I think it's good for us to ask, how do we live into that dichotomy? How to maintain the functions and needs of an organized assembly of people, and then how do we engage in those practices which move us to the rhythms of mystery and wonder, prophecy, wisdom, teachings from ancient and modern sources, and nature herself? That's the challenge. And I'd love to have an answer right now. But I think the answer is in all of us. As we think about what it is to be a congregation, a church, what is it to be Unitarian Universalists? Is it just people who gather together on Sunday morning and greet one another and hear about our lives? Yes, that's important. That's part of it. To know Zoom, to set up the things that we need to set up. But there has to be something deeper, something more central to the very existence of our lives as individuals and as a congregation. So let us look to nature, the realities, the difficulties, the struggles, and the incredible beauty and comfort. Amen. Blessed be.